Hello everyone, this is Rick and welcome to Astral Club. Today's video I think you'll find extremely interesting. Last night I was looking up at this big beautiful full moon, and after that I didn't think about it any longer. And I had an astral projection in the middle of the night. It was a very restless night, but I finally had an astral projection. And I concentrated on going to a very different alternate Earth. That was my goal. Something that was extremely alien, very different, much more different than the nuclear war Earth, for instance. So I had a moment of unconsciousness, and when I came to, I was hovering over a moonless Earth. So this video is going to be called Astral Journey to Alternate Moonless Earth. Before I get right into that though, I just want to mention that I appreciate the Patreon support. The link to Patreon is in the description. People who join Patreon not only get shout outs in my videos, but also get the videos early, and they have a way to direct email me with questions through Patreon. So if that's something you feel drawn to do, you can see the link in the description. And a couple things I want to mention before I get into the main category or the main subject of this video. Last week we talked about guides, and we talked about tests that would often happen, testing your weaknesses and trying to find out if you deserve a guide or a high angel or some sort of an ascended master, or you qualify, or to find the right one. I don't know, whatever you want to call it. I don't know why the tests exist exactly, they just do. I was talking about it with my daughter earlier because she had seen the video earlier. And we both had testing dreams. Mine was about extroversion. And it was a test for extroversion. See, I'm typically an introvert. You know those psychology tests that sometimes they give you before you get a job, and they'll give you a choice. Would you rather read a book on a quiet evening in a comfortable chair next to a roaring fire? Or would you rather go to a wild party, drink yourself silly, and throw up in and around your best friend's toilet? My choice would always be reading the book in the comfy chair by the fire. But I realized that in order to spread the word of astral projection and assist others, I need to be more extroverted. And so this test had me with my brother and my sister, and we went to this place, this vacation place, and we became separated. I ended up in this convention hall, where there was all these festivities going on, and at first I ignored everything, just tried to find my brother and my sister. But then I decided to listen to the band, and I started joking around with a group of guys, and I started talking with some other people there was a Star Trek convention going on, and we were talking about that. So when my dream was over, I realized that was it felt like a test, and so I think I passed. My daughter, Rose, also had a test, and in her test, there was a nuclear war, and she had to make a choice whether she was going to go and help to heal people at a hospital, or if she was going to try to stay and protect herself, and she passed as well. So those are just some examples of some tests that we went through, and I think you'll find that if you start thinking about this and looking for guides or ascended masters, that you're going to have some testing dreams as well. And you'll know it because when you wake up, they'll feel different than your typical dreams. And you may even feel a little tired. You'll definitely feel like you went through some sort of test. Okay, that's the prior week's video. Let's get to this alternate reality where the Earth has no moon. Now, if you remember from a previous video, the theory of the multiverse is that there is innumerable, uncountable, virtually infinite alternate universes, including alternate solar systems with alternate Earths, and that they're all different from one another because events proceeded a little bit differently in one way or another. Some quite drastically went a different way, whereas others were fairly similar. The nuclear war dimension video, for instance, was an Earth that was probably very similar to ours, but it branched off in 1983 when the Soviet Union and the United States had a nuclear war. In this one, I popped up over what I thought was supposed to be the Earth, but when I looked down at this planet, it looked like an alien planet. It looked nothing like what we call Earth. So my first instinct was, I must have gotten misdirected perhaps. For a stray second, I allowed my consciousness to wander, and instead of trying to select an alternate Earth, I ended up with some alien planet. So the first thing I do when I encounter these types of situations is I look for signposts, things that are familiar that'll help me get oriented. So the first thing I would do naturally is look for the moon. And I saw no moon. And believe me, our moon is big. It's hard to miss. So I started thinking, okay, alien planet. But then I looked around and saw Venus. Looked around, saw Mars. And you can't miss Saturn and Jupiter. So I started thinking, well, wow, I mean, perhaps this is Earth, but an Earth that for whatever reason, whatever series of events went wrong, has no moon. So I decided to go down and see exactly what we're looking at. Now, from above, what I saw was essentially a major landmass that kind of looked to me like Australia if you increased its size by 2 or 2.5 times, and then you turned it up on its side. That's kind of what the landmass looked like. Now, there were some other landmasses scattered around this universal ocean, but nothing anywhere nearly as big as that. So that's the area that I went down to check out. As I got closer, I was greeted by essentially a flat, barren, rocky plain, kind of like New Jersey. I know, because I used to live there, and I remember one time when Rose was little, she was in the car, and living in New Jersey, everything's pretty flat. She saw the local landfill, and she said, "Daddy, is that a mountain?" I said, "By New Jersey standards, yes, honey." At any rate, this place was a barren, rocky, flat plain. I cruised over it for what must have been at least hundreds of miles, and I saw nothing that looked alive. It was completely lifeless and devoid of anything really interesting. So I went to the shore. Generally, if there's going to be something interesting, you'll see it washed up on the shore. So I went there, and I did behold some life. So I landed, and what I saw, the sun was just coming up at this point. So it was early morning, and there was this whole row, something like 10 or 20 deep, of these plants that were right between the sand and where the shore, the waves came up, and these little green sprouts that were kind of like seaweedy type of thing, but they were drier, a little bit harder. They were green, and they were, I guess, absorbing the sun. I was able to touch them because in this particular reality, I had some solidity to me, and they felt kind of like a grassy seaweed type object. I stared at them for a while just because it was the only thing that was interesting at that point in time from a life standpoint. But it hadn't been more than a handful of minutes when, for some reason, all of a sudden, all of the plants went down into what was essentially, it was covered by a white shell, if you want to use that term. It wasn't actually made of a shell, but it was white, and it was a hard plant type material. And this green seaweed took refuge inside of this hard white shell. And all the rows of this seaweed, they all pretty much did it at the same time. So there must have been some sort of trigger. I don't think it was my touching it, because why would it be? Without life or animal life, it would have no reason to react to me, because it had no experience in that. But there was some sort of signal where all of a sudden it took refuge inside of this hard white, I don't know, shell is the best word I can think of right now, but I don't want you to think that it was made of calcium. It was definitely a hardened, dried plant type of material. So I figured, well, okay, what else is going on here? I decided to progress a little bit further into the day just to see if anything changed, maybe tides or what have you. Although I'm aware that without a moon, there's probably not going to be that much, that many tides. So I progressed, a few hours or so into the day, just a handful, and the sun started going down. So this particular Earth had a very short day. Now, I don't have any way of knowing exactly what the day's length was, because there's no watches and there's no clocks. But I can tell you that it was definitely much shorter than a typical day that we have today with on our planet. So I progressed further, and the sun rose again, also fairly quickly. So with the sun up, I went into the ocean to do some exploring. I soared through the top layer of the ocean, and it was pretty lifeless. I didn't see anything in what I would consider the top 100 feet or so. Just water. That's it. So I dived down to the bottom and started cruising over that area. Eventually, finally, I discovered some jelly-type creatures, and some of them were white, some were a little bit more translucent. I ended up, as I was cruising, I found a hot vent, where the hot water is coming out of the earth, and there was tube worms, or something very much like a tube worm. But it also had this type of, well, it's a tube worm, so it had a shell, but it also would dart inside these little holes that were all around the area of the hot water vent. So I guess they also were able to take refuge when necessary. There was, I also, during my trip, I saw more versions of that seaweed that I saw on land, although this version of it was obviously moister, but the shell was thinner. It wasn't as thick. So I was thinking that perhaps in some way they're related. Perhaps they went onto the shore and through some sort of evolutionary process they were able to thicken this shell covering for whatever reason to exist on this particular shoreline in this very, very desolate continent. As funny as it might seem, I started thinking that this would make for a boring story if I couldn't find something more interesting for you guys. So I decided that I would progress much further into the future of this world, hoping that perhaps some other sort of life or what have you might evolve so that I could tell you stories that were a bit more interesting. Now, before I get into the actual progression, I already described to you what the basic land looked like. There were poles. Essentially, there was a frozen northern area and a frozen southern area. So that's important for me to note as well. So as I progressed into the future, I want 1,000,000, 2,000,000, somewhere around 2.5 million years with not a lot changing, when suddenly there was some sort of enormous disaster. The land experienced an earthquake unlike anything I'd ever seen before. A wave that had to be hundreds and hundreds of feet started coming. It may have been as much as 1,000 feet, which is what, something like I don't know, 300 or so meters, started coming in from the sea. That was something that scared me. Now, I know that I really can't be hurt, but something like that's pretty intimidating. So I shot straight up and started looking down on what was going on. And what I saw was amazing to me. Essentially, that earth flipped over. Within a very short period of time, as I progressed, the poles went to the various equators, and there was enormous disasters spreading all over the planet. And I can only imagine what devastation and what destruction some sort of disaster like that would have caused to life and to the surface of the planet. As I progressed further, the new poles formed and the old ones melted, causing enormous floods and even more devastation. The only thing that made me feel good is there didn't seem to be a lot of highly developed life that lost its livelihood in this situation. And perhaps that's why, if something like that was going to happen on some sort of a regular basis, I can't imagine how any kind of sophisticated life would be able to evolve. So I figured, well, after watching something like that, at least it was interesting enough to hopefully make a video that is at least moderately entertaining. I decided to go back to, you know, our time frame, and so with a bit of concentration, I found myself back inside my bedroom. So I think we need to, if what I saw was indicative of indeed the absence of the moon, I think we need to be extremely grateful for that big old light in the sky, because it does a lot more for us than just some tides and something for lovers to look at as they walk on the beach at night. Well, I hope you found that experience fascinating. It's certainly something that I did. I'm not going to go back there again. That Earth just isn't something that I find all that appealing. But it certainly was a compelling story to wonder, like, what if? What would have happened to us if we had never gotten a moon? Well, I'd like to thank you for taking the time. If you haven't subscribed yet, why don't you hit that subscribe button? It helps out the channel. If you have subscribed, and I know many of you have, and I appreciate that, why don't you hit the bell button? That way you'll get notifications whenever there's a new video. If you liked this video, hit the like button. I also love your questions and your comments. So please leave those, and who knows, they may pop up on a future Q&A episode. Well, this is Rick and Astral Club, and I will see you on the astral plane.